A couple who had been married for 17 years had 12 children, simply because they thought that young children were cute. However, as the children grew up, this couple allowed them to live in a filthy, suffocating place where they could only bathe once a year and were given only one meal of bread each day. One day, what seemed like a normal day, David's behavior suddenly became unusual. He commanded Jordan in a harsh tone, forced her into a room, and demanded that she strip in front of him. Just as things were about to unfold, Louise, like a bolt of lightning, rushed in and stopped the act in time. In 2014, the family deliberately moved to California and purchased a house worth $350,000 with a $55,000 down payment. How could they afford it when they were already burdened with $250,000 in debt and had allowed every previous home they lived in to fall into disarray? Yet, they used only $5,000 of their own money to put down for the house, despite repeatedly filing for bankruptcy. While they were allowed to erase their debt and start fresh, the abuse toward their children continued, even escalating, both physically and mentally. At one point, Louise and David made people think they were just a normal family, but now they had become ruthless abusers, locking their children in the house, stripping them of their freedom and joy, and causing harm through cruel actions. One day, Louise bought a pastry and placed it on the table, but none of the children dared to touch it because she herself didn't like to eat pastries. The children could only watch the pastry spoil, even though they desperately wanted it. They had to eat the same spoiled food in meager portions. They did the same thing when they bought 10 brand new bicycles, placing them in front of the children, but forbidding them to touch. Toys were displayed in a room, but the children were not allowed to play with them, only to suffer by watching them. Louise often indulged in shopping, constantly buying new clothes and toys, storing them in several rooms, and not allowing anyone to touch them. For their eldest daughter, Jordan, at one point, she managed to escape from the house and called emergency services. When trying to explain her location to the police, Jordan struggled because she didn't know the street name, couldn't differentiate the directions, and didn't know how far she was from the city center. But she did one special thing. She carried an envelope, read the zip code from it, and with the phone signal, the police were able to pinpoint her location at 6:11 a.m. When they found her, Jordan was frail and trembling, with long black hair and pale skin, clearly speaking to outsiders for the first time. The police asked if she had used any illegal substances, which surprised her since she had never interacted with anyone before, had no idea how to socialize or talk, and even asked, "What is a drug?" because she didn't understand the concept. The Turpin family lived in California, a Christian family with many children, in what could be considered an upper-middle-class neighborhood. They seemed to be living the American dream, surrounded by white and beige houses, everything looking perfect and clean, with neatly trimmed lawns. Everything was flawless, even somewhat ordinary. This was typical suburban life in America, where people grill BBQ, host street parties, kids ride bikes, draw chalk on the sidewalks. A perfect place to raise children. David and Louise, the parents of the family, claimed they were living the American dream. On Facebook, Louise posted pictures of the family, their kids at Disneyland, and their trip to Las Vegas, creating an image of a wonderful life where everyone wore matching outfits, stood in a row like a perfect family. David Turpin, born in 1961, grew up in a strict Christian family and met Louise when they were young. Both families were religious, attending church regularly. We know little about David's childhood, but more details are known about Louise. As a child, Louise and her mother were abused by her father. At the age of 16, she ran away with David, an idea of David's, wanting to start a new life. Louise was thrilled to have someone take her away from the abusive home. Initially, the Turpins lived well. David earned a degree in electrical engineering, and they moved to Texas, where David worked a high-paying job in the Air Force. They quickly married, moved into their first apartment, and began their life together. With a good income, they lived comfortably, went to Disneyland, and enjoyed expensive places, living in luxury. When Louise's relatives visited, they spoiled them, taking them out to eat at restaurants and traveling, creating a good impression with everyone. 3 years later, they had their first child, Jennifer. From the start, Louise made it clear that she wanted to have as many children as possible, giving birth until she couldn't anymore, and all their children's names began with the letter J. 5 years later, Joshua and Jessica were born, and everything seemed harmonious from the outside. But soon, everything began to fall apart. The lavish lifestyle that David and Louise had once proudly flaunted could no longer be sustained due to both of them falling into addiction. Louise became addicted to gambling, losing a significant amount of money at casinos. Jennifer, at the age of 8, went to school and quickly became an outcast due to her body's foul odor, poor hygiene, and always wearing the same unwashed clothes with her hair tied with a candy wrapper. Her classmates would hold their noses when she walked by, sneer at her, and even scold her. Jennifer attended school for 3 years, then never returned, disappearing from everyone's sight. Louise decided to homeschool the children, starting the process of isolating the Turpin family from the outside world. First, the children stopped going to school, then they were forbidden from playing outside and prohibited from interacting with the neighbors' kids. Louise tried to teach them at home, but she wasn't a professional teacher, and her limited knowledge couldn't replace a proper education. The children were not only confined to their rooms physically, but also mentally isolated due to the lack of education. At first, Louise taught them a few lessons each month, but then she stopped altogether, having only completed up to high school herself. Meanwhile, the family continued to grow. In 1995, their 4th child was born, and Louise's sister Elizabeth moved in with them. Elizabeth was the first and only person to see the darker side of the family, as before. She only knew about the things they boasted about, like their Disneyland trip or their Facebook posts. But when she lived with them, she realized that the children had to ask permission for everything, even to go to the bathroom or eat. David and Louise were extremely strict, punishing even the smallest mistakes, frequently beating the children and isolating them in their rooms, only letting them out for meals. They were also forbidden from talking to Elizabeth. Their parents taught them to be frugal, so they only bathed once a year, usually on Mother's Day. If they were caught washing their hands or any other body part, they were severely punished and tied to their beds for several days. Meals were served from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., always sandwiches or frozen burritos, with only one meal per day. The children were called out one by one to eat under supervision, and after eating, they were sent straight back to their rooms. By 2000, 3 more children were born, followed by the 11th and 12th children. Over 17 years, David and Louise had 12 children. Eventually, the house became so filthy it was uninhabitable. David built a trailer, like a mobile home, for the older children to live in, installing cages to lock up the disobedient ones. Because their house was in such poor condition, they rented an apartment 50 miles away, moving there with the 2 youngest children because they liked babies and their cute small size. But as they grew up and started developing their own opinions, they were treated like the older siblings. They left the 10 remaining children in the trailer, with Joshua and Jennifer in charge of taking care of them. Even though their parents were absent, all the rules were still strictly enforced. Anyone who misbehaved was locked in a cage and punished, as if David and Louise were still there. They constantly called to check, keeping everything under control. The children knew only what their parents taught them. They couldn't go to school, didn't know what happiness or freedom was, and were only familiar with captivity and punishment. Occasionally, David would bring frozen food, but it was never enough. Eventually, Jennifer decided to run away, meeting a neighbor and asking where she could find work. The neighbor took her to downtown, but Jennifer had no ID or work experience and couldn't find a job. Desperate, she called her mother to come pick her up and take her back to the trailer. The situation continued for another 4 years until David and Louise returned. During that time, the children had opportunities to escape, but did not. The house, connected to the trailer, now faced the risk of foreclosure, prompting the parents to return to clean it up. Clean up meant packing up their things and leaving as usual. One day, a neighbor noticed that the Turpin house was always empty and curiously looked over the fence, hearing strange noises. When they opened the door, 2 emaciated dogs rushed out and hid in the bushes. These dogs had been left behind every time they left, surviving by eating trash and drinking toilet water. The house was just like their other home in California, with dirty carpets, walls smeared with feces, a horrible stench, and dead animal carcasses scattered around due to being abandoned. The Turpin family returned to California because Louise believed they could become famous on social media. She constantly posted pictures and videos on Facebook, showing a family life far from the truth. The children swimming, going to Disneyland, or photos of David and Louise renewing their vows in Las Vegas, making the neighbors suspect nothing. But the new neighbors soon noticed the Turpin house lights were on all night, and the children moved strangely in the rooms, as if they didn't know what to do. In 2015, Louise, 47, gave birth to the last child, Jenna. Jordan was one of the few children who secretly broke the rules, often borrowing Jennifer's phone, even though it only had limited functions. Later, the older children were favored by their parents for following the rules. Jordan used the phone to record songs and even posted a few videos on Twitter or YouTube, learning the alphabet, language, and grammar through the videos. These videos expanded her view of the world, making her see a different life and begin to question her own, having known only imprisonment and punishment. She saw other children growing up happily, while Louise remained unaware. Jordan continued to post videos until a stranger noticed her, always filming in the dark in a small room, and asked if she was okay. Jordan replied that they had no food, were beaten, and punished, asking if that was normal. The stranger told her it wasn't normal and urged her to call the police immediately. But before she could do so, Louise found out, pressuring Jordan into thinking she would die. On January 14, 2018, Jordan, then 17 years old, decided to take action. Realizing that her life and the way she was treated were not normal, she and her siblings made a plan to escape, knowing that they only had one chance. If David and Louise caught them, she believed she could die. That morning, at 5:49, she climbed through the window, holding a phone with no signal, unable to make a call. Wearing a hood, she ran down the street, stopped for a moment, and then ran as fast as she could. Her body trembled as she tried to call for help, a completely new and terrifying experience, having to talk to a stranger. Nevertheless, she overcame her fear, contacted the police, and told them about the abuse in the house, about how she lived, and that the last time she had bathed was a year ago. When the police asked to see her phone, she handed it over, which contained pictures of her siblings tied to their beds or huddled in the corner of a room. About an hour later, the police arrived and arrested David and Louise. Upon entering the house, they found several children lying on the dirty floor or bed, one of them tied up for a week, with bruised hands. All of them were pale, emaciated, and covered in injuries. The police thought they were minors because they were so small and underdeveloped due to malnutrition. They were taken to the station, interviewed separately, given baths, and sent to the hospital for care. Most were underweight and had difficulty walking, some had heart issues, limited vocabularies, and, having only spoken to each other, developed a unique way of speaking. Jennifer, 29 years old, weighed only 88 pounds and could not have children due to years of abuse. At the hospital, while listening to music, Jennifer stood up and danced for the first time, feeling freedom and happiness, which shocked the nurses as they had never seen a case like this before. They were given new clothes, people donated, and the hospital set up a charity account that raised a lot of money due to media attention. Although still children in their hearts, many of the kids had grown up, spending their entire lives in captivity until adulthood. Everything was new to them, and they had to relearn everything from scratch. Jordan recalled how, when she and two of her sisters went to the park, she was excited to breathe in the fresh air and smell the grass. David and Louise were jailed. Louise became delusional, and David cried in court, claiming his innocence. Both were sentenced to life in prison with 14 charges, including captivity, torture, and threatening the lives of their children. They could be released after 25 years, but would never be allowed to meet or contact their children. In court, Jennifer and Joshua testified, reading letters from their siblings. Now, some of the children have gone to college, some are learning to live independently, and the younger children live with adoptive families. However, in 2019, reports came out that 5 of the children were being abused in their foster home. By early 2020, reports indicated that most of them had found jobs and become independent, but in reality, some were homeless, unable to integrate or accept their past. Much of the donated money was also stolen. This case serves as a wake-up call about the darkness of domestic violence. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts to help prevent domestic violence.